Welcome to the Provost Podcast. I'm the Provost, Tim Huebner at Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm here today with Dr. Courtney Collins, who graduated from Rhodes Phi Beta Kappa in 2005 with a bachelor's in economics. She went on to earn a PhD in applied economics from Texas A&M in 2010. Her research focuses on the economics of education and public economics. After earning her PhD, she taught briefly at Mercer University, where in 2012 she received the Mercer University Stetson School of Business and Economics Distinguished Faculty Award. She then joined the faculty here at her alma mater, Rhodes College, in 2013. She's a famously excellent teacher at Rhodes, as students and colleagues praise her for her enthusiasm, rigor, and her deep care for students. We know that her office hours are always busy, and Courtney gets to know her students as individuals so that she can mentor them based on their needs, experiences, and backgrounds. For these reasons and others, she recently won the 2025 Clarence Day Award for Outstanding Teaching. Welcome, Courtney.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Well, we're so glad that you're here. Tell us about your journey. How did you first get interested in economics?
So like you said, I was an undergraduate at Rhodes, and I was one of those students who came to college with everything planned out. I thought I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I fully intended to come to Rhodes as an English and theater major. And the only reason I ever took an econ class was because I had not done a stellar job at summer registration, and when I got here in the fall, I had 3 empty course slots to fill. So I was kind of scrambling last minute to try to fill those classes, and shockingly, there was space open in an 8 a.m. econ class. And I remember calling my parents and saying, "Hey, I just signed up for econ." And they said, "Courtney, are you sure you want to take economics?" And I said, "I am not at all sure I want to take economics, but I need a class." I had taken the 1 year or half year course in high school that a lot of students take about economics, and I came away from that class with the vague notion that econ had something to do with money and prices and possibly the stock market, none of which sounded remotely interesting to me at all, so I was pretty sure this course was going to be boring. But I got into the class, and I realized after maybe just a week or two that I was totally wrong about what economics was, and that at its heart, econ is all about people, and it's about the trade-offs they face and the choices they make at all kinds of different levels. And I realized I could use the tools I was learning in this class to ask all kinds of questions that I thought were interesting and relevant and important about the world around me. And I had this professor, so I had Mark McMahon in my first semester at Rhodes, and a lot of alumni and faculty listeners will remember Professor McMahon, and he was magic. He was incredible in the classroom. He was dynamic and engaging and alive, and he pulled us all in. Right. And then outside of the classroom, he went above and beyond what was required of him as a professor, and really just invested in my life and in the lives of my classmates in a way that I can't quite fully put into words, but it was really special. So I took this class, and I remember taking the class the whole semester, taking the final exam, and walking across campus and kind of patting myself on the back and thinking, well, good job, Courtney. You broadened your horizons, right, and you did the thing you're supposed to do in college, and you stepped out of the box a little bit. And the class had been challenging and hard and kind of made my brain hurt in a good way. And I remember explicitly thinking to myself, I don't want to be an econ major or anything, but I'm glad I took the class. And then the next semester rolled around, and I found out that they use the same book for the second class that they used for the first one. And college textbooks are really expensive. They were expensive. They were expensive 20 years ago. Yes. So I thought, well, I already have the book. I need another social science. Might as well sign up, and the rest is kind of history.
Wow, that is a great story and a powerful story. And I like what you said about economics being all about people and trade-offs and choices. And tell me more about that, and especially about the research that you have done and what you've been interested in those. I mean, it's just such an interesting way of framing that. So how did you get into the research that you do?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've always thought that's fascinating about economics is that once you learn a little bit of the vocabulary and once you learn some of the foundational principles, all of a sudden you start to see econ everywhere. Mm-hmm. And there are things that you may not have initially thought of as being economics. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, that's a foundational economic principle. And economics, I realized at some point kind of along the way in that first class, or maybe the second one, that it's another means of storytelling. And it looks different than what it might have looked like had I been an English major. But I was also always fascinated at the capacity of economics to tell stories and to describe the world around me. And education was one of those things that I initially had never thought of as being at all related to economics. And then as I learned more of those tools, I realized, oh, this is at the heart of what economics is. I am the daughter of a public elementary school teacher. And so growing up, part of our standard dinner time conversations and conversations we had driving down the road in the car as a family often revolved around questions related to our local school system or questions related to state or federal education policy. My mom often talked about educational philosophy and has always been really passionate and had a lot of convictions about the educational system. And so I was always kind of curious and interested in questions related to education. And so when I went to graduate school, that's what I focused my research on. So one of my recent papers is a demand for schooling paper. Mm-hmm. So my co-author and I estimate kind of how much people are willing to pay for better schools. And we measure that by historical test scores within the school system. And it's kind of a fun paper for me to have written as someone living in Memphis, because we use data from Memphis and from Shelby County. And as you probably know, over the past, 12 years, the school system in Memphis has experienced a lot of changes. Right. So it used to be the case in Memphis that there were kind of two public school systems within the county, the city system and the county system. And there's always been kind of historically some tension between those systems, and that kind of came to a head about a little more than a decade ago. And there was political controversy back and forth. There was several phases of legislation that occurred, and some court battles. But the upshot of that was that they went from a two district school system. There was 1 year where they combined into one mega district with everybody all together. And then the year after that, the 6 municipalities in the suburbs all created their kind of independent school districts. And what was interesting about this for my co-author and I is that if you look at a map, there are all these really weirdly shaped geographic areas that either switched schools or switched school districts. Mm-hmm. And some of those, were redistricted to better schools or worse schools. Some were redistricted to the city or the county. And so we use that to estimate and to answer the question, well, how much are people willing to pay for a slightly better school or for a school that's administered separately from the county? And we found that, people are, in fact, willing to pay a little bit more. In terms of estimates, we found a 1 standard deviation increase in school quality raises housing prices by about 2 to 3%. And then having a separate district administration, so like being in one of those separate municipalities, raises prices by about 6 to 8%, which we found was kind of consistent with some of the previous literature and also consistent with kind of anecdotal evidence. If you kind of ask around, how much might you be willing to pay? But that was a cool paper to do in the context of Memphis and having lived in the Memphis area for a while.
That's fascinating work. Thank you for that. I'm talking with Dr. Courtney Collins, Associate Professor of Economics at Rhodes College. We're going to shift our focus a little bit. Tell me a little bit about the courses that you teach here at Rhodes.
So I teach courses that are kind of across the range of a student's time at Rhodes. I pretty regularly teach our Econ 100 course, which is a Principles of Micro and Macro course. That one's always fun to teach because it's great to be able to introduce students at the very beginning to what economics looks like. And then almost every semester I teach intermediate micro. So that course kind of takes some of the concepts they will have heard about in that intro course and does kind of a deep dive into some of the theory and the mathematical underpinnings of those concepts. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I teach a course called Advanced Econometrics, which is mostly seniors, and it's the second course in our 2-course econometric sequence. That one is so much fun to teach because at that point, students have taken that intro course to econometrics. They know the theory. They're sort of sold on wanting to learn more, and so that course is a lot of fun. I taught it this past spring, and maybe Tim, you'll have this experience as well. I feel like every once in a while you get a class and the dynamic of the students themselves in the class is just really special. And that was one of those classes for me. They came ready to work and ready to play and excited about the material and ready to be challenged. So that was pretty special to get to teach that class.
That's wonderful when that happens, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's great. That's great. Why should students come to Rhodes College to study economics?
So I guess I'll try to answer that question with the appropriate level of humility, given that I'm the department chair and I happen to think that econ at Rhodes is pretty great. I guess I'll start by saying that I teach with an incredible group of colleagues who are really, really great at what they do. They are excited about economics. They are thoughtful about the way they design their courses. They are excited about their own research and are constantly thinking about how best to introduce students to economics, to involve them in their own research, to kind of walk alongside them as they learn, what they themselves will look like as economic researchers, and to get to see them across that whole spectrum from those initial courses to their senior capstone class. About a month ago, we had our senior seminar students present at Rhodes Symposium, and that was just so much fun because they're all presenting their own independent research, their research ideas, and they've worked with one of our faculty members who teaches senior sim, who just does an incredible job. And so for the faculty, it was great to get to be there and to watch them look at all of these different interesting questions, things that the students themselves said, this is important to me and this is interesting to me. So it's been fun to get to watch them do that. I'll also say that our faculty members as a department, I think we're all kind of on the same page in that we want our students to come away from the major with something substantive and something of value. I think we'll all kind of recognize that economics can sometimes be challenging, and that's by design. We want our students to be challenged, and we want them to work. And maybe this sounds a little odd, but sometimes we want them to struggle a little bit, because it's often through that process of struggling and recognizing that the answers aren't always immediate and they're not always easy. That's part of what learning looks like, both in college and for us as grown-up economists, and what learning sometimes continues to look like. So all of that's kind of by design. I think our department members would all say that we want our students to come away from the major with a really solid theoretical understanding of econ. But also a ton of really practical skills. And we've worked really hard over the past, 7 or 8 years to try to expand our course offerings in terms of the quantitative courses they're able to take and the kinds of practical skills they're able to get from those courses that are useful for a really wide range of careers. We want them to be able to hit the ground running,
right,
whether they are headed off to grad school or whether they're starting their careers right after Rhodes. I think we're pretty proud of the breadth and the depth of the courses we're able to offer them. We're not a huge department,
right,
but we like to say sometimes that we punch above our weight a little bit in terms of being able to offer students a really, really wide range of electives and course offerings. I was talking to some recent graduates a while back who were all in graduate school, and they talked about how prepared they felt and how equipped they felt relative to some of their peers, many of whom had been in much bigger undergraduate programs that had certainly a lot more resources than we might have. But they talked about, at Rhodes we had these opportunities,
right,
and we had these courses, and we were able to build these relationships with faculty members. And that felt really, really good to hear, because that's something our department has worked intentionally on for a while, making sure that we're preparing them the very best that we can and that they're ready to go out in whatever their world looks like post-Rhodes. And then I guess I'll also say that the dynamic within our department is really great. I have colleagues who work really collaboratively, right, and that's not a small thing. It makes department chair being
right
really easy, but that dynamic kind of spills out into our relationships with students, and to some extent it spills out onto their relationships with each other. And it's always fun to get to kind of watch them progress, individually as they move through the major, but also in their relationships with each other. So that's kind of neat. Excellent.
That's great. What makes Rhodes College special to you?
So that's a great question. Rhodes is home for me, and Rhodes is a place where so many people cared about me as a student, where they helped me figure out who I was as a student and who I am as a scholar and as a teacher and as an economist, and to some extent who I am as a person. And I am incredibly grateful to have had that experience as a student, both within the econ department and really across campus. There were people in all kinds of different departments who were pouring into my life and who cared about me. And it's really neat to get to be back here as a faculty member and to have a lot of those people as colleagues. I'll also say Rhodes is special to me because when I started here as a student, so I have a little sister who is 12 years younger than me. So my first day of college was her first day of kindergarten.
Oh, wow.
And every so often while I was here as a student, she would come up for the weekends and she would spend the night in the dorms and
that's great.
Eat at the Rat and climb on the links. Don't tell anyone about the links. And then when I came back as a faculty member, she was kind of starting her college search, and she ended up at Rhodes as a student. She was a business major here, and I actually got to teach her in an Econ 100 class. So that was really special, and it was neat to get to see the Rhodes student perspective kind of from her eyes again. And then I guess I'll say more generally that Rhodes is just a really special community, faculty, staff, students. I was listening to one of my colleagues the other day say, she was talking about, what is Rhodes? And she said, I think if you ask all of us, if you ask all the faculty what is Rhodes, we'll all say something, slightly different. And I think that's fair. I think that's true. But I think the vast majority of faculty would say that at its heart and at its core, Rhodes is all about that connection between students and faculty. When I think about my experience as an undergrad, that was the defining characteristic for me, that relationship with faculty members. And it was more quintessentially Rhodes for me than the stained glass and the slate roofs and Gothic architecture and every tree in Oak Alley. And I will say as an alum, all of those things are really close to my heart. But that faculty-student relationship is something that's really special. It is why students come to Rhodes. It is why I came back to Rhodes as a faculty member. I think it's why many of my colleagues have come here as faculty members, because they believe that relationship with students is important and it's something valuable and it matters. And it's something that they've dedicated their lives to. They think that it's important. And it's neat for me to get to be on the faculty side of that relationship and to get to have those relationships with students. It's also really neat. Students will come to my office and they'll sit down, start to talk about economics. And then invariably they'll say something like, let me tell you about my chemistry professor or my music professor or my philosophy professor. And as they're talking about those experiences they've had in those classes or in those labs, or doing research with other faculty members, I will hear echoes of my relationships with them, and I'll realize that this is something that's just bubbling up all over campus. And that relationship, it's not just something Rhodes does. It's not a box we check off. It is at the very heart of our identity as an institution. And I think it's been that way for a long time. If I go back to my very first class I had with Mark McMahon, that relationship between faculty and students, that was the hallmark of that class. So Professor McMahon, actually, he died in December, and that was really hard in a lot of different ways, but our department received so many emails and messages from faculty and former faculty and students from decades and decades ago, and they all told variations of the same story. And it was just abundantly clear that he cared about them as students and as people, and he made such a significant impact on their lives. And they carried these stories and these memories with them, and the experiences they had, sometimes 40 years ago were just so precious to them and special to them. And I looked at all of those emails and read them kind of over and over again, and I thought two things. And the first is that in a lot of ways, Rhodes now is really different than when I was a student 20 years ago, and there's a lot of ways in which we've changed. And certainly it's different than it was 40 years ago or 50 years ago or 60 years ago. But that faculty-student relationship has remained constant across time. And I think it has always, for a long, long time, been the core of who we are and what we do and what we care about. And the second thing I thought about when I read those emails was how grateful I am to get to be even just a small part of that legacy and a small part of that story, and to get to have been a student in the classroom with Mark McMahon, and then to get to teach in that very same classroom, and to get to mentor new students and meet them and be part of the beginnings of their stories and their, the conversations that we will have with them throughout their time at Rhodes and after their time at Rhodes. And I'm really grateful to get to be part of that community and a little piece of that legacy, and to get to be back at the place that really contributed to who I am.
Wonderful. Thank you for your eloquent words. Thank you for your excellent work as a teacher and scholar and mentor. I've been speaking with Dr. Courtney Collins, Associate Professor of Economics, Chair of the Department of Economics, and winner of the 2025 Clarence Day Award for Outstanding Teaching. Thank you, Courtney.
Thanks, Tim.
And this is Tim Hubner signing off as the Provost, and thank you for listening to the Provost Podcast.